Welcome to another episode of the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week I've got Andrea Hudy in the house. That's right, legendary strength conditioning specialist and coach for, director of sports performance for UConn women's basketball for many years now. Championship team. We're going to find out a little bit more about how she gets her players into rip-rockin' shape, as well as how she deals with the injuries. But before that, we've also got a little bit of continuing education opportunities coming up for you. I'm going to be doing a course in Capitola, California, November 3rd, all about posture-based soft tissue mobilization. Do you know that by bringing the body back into a more centrated place, you can deal with a lot of chronic issues and achieve more optimal performance just by understanding what targets that you want to roll or work on? So you can join me for more information, RockySnyder.com. There's CEUs available for athletic trainers, physical therapists, chiropractors, strength coaches, and personal trainers. So check us out at RockySnyder.com. And don't forget Satanta College. That's the place to go for a master's degree if you want one in science for applied sports biomechanics and movement science, applied sport and exercise psychology. They've got one for performance coaching as well as a master's of science in sports injuries and return to performance management. If you put in the code RS10, you'll get 10% off tuition today. Just go to satantacollege.com and away with the show. Well, Andrea, I can't thank you enough for coming on Zealous. It's been a little over a year since the NSCA National Conference in Vegas. You did your keynote speech, and I was enthralled by what you're sharing with the crowd, and I knew I just had to reach out and meet you. So here we are a little bit later, and yeah, I've been waiting for this moment for a while. So thank you for putting a little time aside in your overfull schedule. And I know you're getting ready for an amazing season with the UConn Huskies, but welcome to Zealous.
Thank you for having me. And I'm sure we're going to stay in touch more in the future.
Well, I hope so, because I strive to not be the smartest person in the room. And this is definitely the case today. I mean, you've got your doctor in philosophy, but also kinesiology, exercise science. You've got an MBA, and you've got a master's in sports biomechanics. Am I missing anything?
I don't have the doctorate yet, but I'm close.
Oh, you're close. Very cool. All right.
I have a bachelor's in kines, a master's in sport biomechanics, MBA, and working for the doctorate. In all those degrees, I proved to myself that I can do it.
Right on. Wait, because the MBA threw me for a loop. I'm wondering, were you planning on going out to the private sector and conquering the world, or was that just something like, oh, I flipped a coin and that's what came up?
Well, you always try to have to plan for the future and plan for the worst case scenario. So I do have that plan, although I love what I do and the population that I work for, but data, right? So getting into data and understanding data and how the business world works with data, like there's so many parallels between sports and business. It's the same, sports are business anyway. So
yeah. All right. Well, we'll talk about that. I want to know about your career path, though. Like what inspired you? What were your sports growing up? Did you just have a great experience in the weight room and said, heck yeah, this is what I want to do, and you've pursued it to the nth degree? Like, how did you get started?
My parents were teachers, like traditional secondary school or high school teachers, secondary, is that right? Teachers, and then all my brothers and sisters, I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so all my brothers and sisters were also teachers. So we grew up in the day where you sat down and had dinner as a family, and it was always about education and what was going on in the education system. And I still feel that I'm an educator at heart. But coaching is different. Coaching and education. Coaching, you get wins and losses. In education, you don't. You just try to get results. And I've always pushed for results. So I was the youngest of 5 and got my butt kicked in every sport that you can imagine by my older brothers and sisters. And I think it gave me a complex of always competing to try to catch up or, be like them. And then my dad built a weight room in our back area, in our back patio, and out of like pipe that you would get from Home Depot. And then it just slowly built over time a weight room, and then their teammates would come and lift, and I was really interested in what they were doing. Um, and yeah, it started there, but then I went to college, and Frank Costello, who was a legend in track and field, became a strength coach like Boyd Epley, right back in the day, where Frank was a high jump coach. So we did a lot of plyometric work, and Frank Costello actually started my interest in it. And then I knew I wanted to study exercise, and my mom was like, "What are you going to do with that?" And yeah, I wish she was alive today to see what I've done with that. But um, yeah, it started with Frank, and then I went to grad school at UConn for sport biomechanics, and I was with Roger Marandino, who he was a classmate. He went on to be the head strength and conditioning coach for the Baltimore Colts, and Jerry Martin was my mentor. And Jerry has passed since, but the strength and conditioning or performance people that have come out of UConn, there's a long history of it. And the exercise science department, I believe, is the third ranked in the country. And I'm now studying with an old friend of mine, Doug Costa's my advisor, and he runs the HEAT lab, and he does a lot of great work with the Corey Stringer Institute across industry, across the world, sports, military, and I'm studying with him right now. So it's great. I'm surrounded by really good people.
Wow, very cool. Yeah, when I think of top 3 institutes for higher learning in the field of exercise science, Springfield College, UConn, Appalachian State. Those are the ones that typically come to mind.
Yeah, and I surround myself with Springfield people every day. I have right now she's considered, on paper, she's an intern, but she has a doctoral degree from China, and she just graduated with her master's degree in strength and conditioning, and she's hanging out with us for a year, and she's phenomenal. Gen Z is phenomenal in what these younger coaches are doing with technology.
How so? What do you mean?
Data visualizations, like visualizations speak to everybody, right? So I took a data viz class as part of my doctoral program, and it's phenomenal what you can do with data and how you can visualize it. Nobody wants to look at a screen of numbers. That it's hard to, for me, it's hard to anyway. And I work for a coach who's been in the business for 40 years or over 40 years. So he's older than I am. And if these things speak to me, they have to speak to him.
Nice. Well, it's great to cover across generations with some communication tool. I imagine that's very powerful.
Right, because all the communication, it's hard because it's how you receive it and how you give it, and everybody's different. But I think visualizations speak volumes.
So you were an associate strength conditioning coach at UConn during the late 90s till about 2004, when they were going on their amazing title runs, national champs, all back-to-back years on some of those. And then you got a different placement, or you went to, I know you went to Kansas and worked with the Jayhawks there. Were you the head strength coach there?
Yeah, I was an assistant athletic director for sport performance. So I had my hands in all sports, but basketball was my primary sport. But I was, I like to teach. I was on the floor for everybody. It was a team of coaches that worked with everyone.
So is that something you would recommend to like the young professionals out there, is to try different roles within the field?
100%. Yeah. I think having a varied background in various places is really good, because then
what did you get out of that experience? What did you bring? What did you take away from that?
How different athletes are specialized, and what I think are some of the needs or the basic foundational work that people are missing. We're told what to do, but then it also tells you kind of what not to do sometimes. Different.
Can you give me an example?
I can't think of one off the top of my head. I would say that probably surrounds more with injury. like what not to do with some people and what to do, because, you know, I don't know if everybody in the collaborative thing that we're involved in between athletic training, the medical doctors, not everybody knows every aspect of everything that we're doing. So a collaborative approach is important. So I think educating one another and getting feedback from one another is super important. And getting thoughts, sharing thoughts. Yeah. That's
Okay,
why
so from
why we're talking now.
I love it. I love it. I just want to be a fly on the wall in your office. You got some pretty amazing athletes and an amazing support staff as well. But and before we get to UConn, just going along this path, you got to Texas. What were you doing in Texas?
I was the director of sports performance for men's and women's basketball. So I went from working at UConn with every athlete to Kansas working with every athlete. Then it was the first job, 28 years in my career was the first time I ever worked with one single population in basketball, both men and women. But then this is my first time in my 30-year career that I have 15 athletes that I'm solely responsible for. That you know, I think the experience of 30 years has gotten me where I am now. But it's the first time that I've been able to focus on one group of athletes.
What's that like to make that shift?
Drinking from a fire hose.
Really?
Yeah, because you can understand and understand who the people are, what motivates them, what nuances they have, their injury history, and we can go down a really deep hole with injury history and how we can really target specific strength or needs of the athlete, where that hasn't been the case in the past for me.
Wow. Yeah, I could see that opening up tremendous doors of opportunity for learning and gaining even more experience than before.
If you think about it, I've gone from 700 athletes at the beginning of my career to 15 at the end. Or I'm not, hopefully it's not at the end of my career.
Wow. Okay, so you bring up injury. Let's talk a little bit about that. I feel personally that that injuries are not necessarily held or considered to be as grave as they really are. And I mean past injuries that create patterns of movement that develop weaknesses because of these compromised positions. I think historically we get an athlete that's injured, the athletic trainer, physical therapist treat the injury, and then they get cleared to go back and play. But I think we're finding more these days that there's a lot more involved that we're not looking at. Would you agree?
100%. One, my personal experience on all of my injuries, which are traumatic. And then two, that's why I'm studying what I'm studying today, because I don't want these athletes to feel what I feel in terms of pain or limitations when they're 50.
Well, whenever you get to 50, you let me know. But because I'm past that point now. So, so what are you studying? You say you just mentioned that.
Yeah, load drives everything, right? So it's dose response. And I've really gotten into studying and characterizing load management for women's basketball, elite women's basketball. And then how that load, one, affects what I used to think was so important was force output, you know, and I still do, but how neurological control in a balance test, how load affects that balance. So not just forces, so we're talking performance with forces, but how the load then, how the dose of load affects the response of force output or balance.
So then there is an ideal that there's a most efficient way of doing that to achieve the highest output. Is that what you're getting at?
We're trying to optimize for sure. And anymore, a lot of recovery techniques. And again, these I was explaining to somebody the other day, I said, when my dad went to college, it was after he was in the Korean War. So probably emotionally, mentally, the guy was probably 40 years old when he was getting his bachelor's degree, and then I went to school and got my degrees. First started, I don't know if I was mature, but I was 18 and I could handle myself, but I don't know if I was mature academically. I went for the experiences, and then today kids with COVID not having social interactions for 2 years, 3 years, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. I often, if you read I think it's called The Coddling of America's Youth, I feel like they haven't had the challenges that my dad had, right? Who went to school
Yeah.
and could have been 40. And um, these kids today, I think, especially with COVID, I think they're less mentally, emotionally mature. But that's where I think if I have an understanding of what they're dealing with and who they are, that I can help them.
That's really interesting. So I I would love to talk a little bit more about that. So with the stunted development years of COVID, shall we say, how does that affect performance?
Well, even early specialization, I deal with athletes who are early specialized. You and I grew up on the playground. I had recess 3 times a day, and then I would go home and play more or go to
Yes.
practice. Where I don't know how much phys ed is a part of their culture because, schools are eliminating it. And recess anymore is kids scrolling on their phones and they're not moving as much as we had. So you talk about foundational fascial lines and movements and foundational strength and work. They're not coming to me with that. They're coming to me with highly specialized basketball skills. So they're coming with a hot rod, a sports car with a lot of miles on it, that maybe we have to undo all that and build a foundation of basic movement patterns, strength, um, where some of the athletes can do high performance training, where some of the athletes, it's really rooted in rehab and foundational fascial work.
That's really cool because it goes along the same thing that I've been thinking for quite some time, just in the general population itself, is that we've been in the industry the same amount of time. And when I first began, the structural level or the level of structural integrity for the average client was much higher 30 years ago than it is today. And I don't want to use the phrase dumbed down, but we've had to recreate program design to accommodate this lower level of structural integrity. And so the common programs that are out there, my own personal and professional belief, is that they are too advanced for the average person to actually execute in the manner in which it was meant to be performed. Would you
Yeah,
say that's, yeah?
you say, what'd you say, structural integrity, and they're coming more injured.
Yes. Yeah.
So now it's like a double negative towards you, right? So less integrity and an injury. So it's fascinating with the things that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, depending upon the type of injury it was, the the medical field, the medical team may view it as insignificant or incredibly significant, depending upon the nature of the injury itself. But I
Ankle
think
sprains aren't just ankle sprains.
no, they're not. I think ankle sprains are probably the leading cause, the first insult to a whole bunch of chronic issues with most people.
And um, you know, when I ask athletes when they come on campus, have you sprained the ankle or an ankle? Yeah, they're like, yeah, both of them, or yeah, really this one. And I'm like, oh man, now, years later, that stuff is stuck with them. And yeah, it's just how can we undo that and build
Yeah.
something, because we're building a a house on a broken foundation.
So how does that reflect your programming? I mean, not to give away trade secrets or anything, and to avoid any infraction of NCAA rules or whatever, but how does all this affect your program design? How has it changed from where you were, say, with just Texas only, 6 to 8 years ago to where you are
Yeah,
now?
it's pre-COVID, right?
Right.
It's pre-COVID. So I feel like programming for me has changed with talking to you about, and here we have a lab that has an asymmetrical treadmill. So we're looking at gait. How do these kids walk? And what leg are they loading on? Now we're using Plantiga on the court, the IMUs and the soles of their shoes. So we're
Oh
getting
yeah.
loading. And I would tell you these injuries have stuck with these athletes, and we're trying to undo it by basic movement, some DNS work. And listen, I don't know much about that. I'm trying to while I'm drinking from a fire hose, but just foundational gait patterning and understanding what's going on there. Because again, we do have a lot of athletes who are loading asymmetrically and their gait is not even correct. So what I need to be careful with is how we load them in the weight room.
And what are you, do you have some go-tos? I mean, now we're getting into generalization rather than specificity with each athlete, but are there some, like when it comes to women's basketball conditioning, what kind of go-to lifts do you typically focus around?
Single leg work, but that doesn't discount double leg work, right?
Sure.
There is a place, is it, are we trying to affect physiology or are we trying to affect neuromuscular, and get the brain activated with heavy loads? And those loads have to be perfect. So now it's like when we do squat, if we do, it's on a dual force plate to see the output and how the body's producing force. And single leg work, we're looking at, we're breaking it down to joint by joint, soleus, gastroc, glute med, what's going on with our lumbar stability, shoulder stability. I feel like I have 10 different screens that we do, but I would argue that our programming is an assessment in itself. So it's the assessment and it's training at the same time.
You have enough force plates to have the lifts be utilized with those force plates? Like every athlete has a force plate in their workout area? Or is it just
Well,
like, okay, I'm going to pull you over here this week and we're just going to see this and then they'll make the adjustments?
yeah, a little bit of both. We have two force plates for weekly assessments, the balance and the force output, because it's easy to track. The software is designed that they kind of track themselves and they're learning. Uh, and the athletes are phenomenal. Gen Z athletes are phenomenal because they do like the visualization and they do like the data. That's what they grew up with. It's the first native digital age. So I think it's important to have it. But then we have 4 racks and we have 2 dual force plates where they can do single leg or double leg work on it and they get feedback.
That is so cool. I don't work with enough young athletes that I've really been exposed to that just what you said about visualization and they just thrive on that. That's really quite cool. I I can't help but think uh, back in the early '90s, NSCA National Conference. I'm one of the young trainers that's just come into the fold, and we've got guys like Fleck and Stone and Dr. Don Chu. In fact, during the New Orleans conference, he invited myself and a couple others to go along after to down in the French Quarter and I was just blown away. But then somewhere, I don't know when it happened, Andrea, and I have no idea. I don't even really want to know, but somewhere along the way, I'm going to these conferences, and now I'm in that position. When did that happen? So when did I become the old guy in the room and hear all these young upstarts? The point I'm trying to bring is like in the years that you've been coaching these young players, there was a time where you were a peer or like fellow athlete, roughly same age as the athletes that you were working with. And now that there's a bit more discrepancy, have you noticed your role morphing into more of a maternal kind of aspect of coach, or what have you experienced with this kind of path and where you are now compared to where you were in the earlier days?
Yeah, I think the maternal one probably started when I went to Kansas. I was probably more a peer when my first time at UConn. Um, but I thought I was working with men's basketball, so to get the respect, I had to do what I asked them to do. That only stopped probably 5 years ago, where I was like, my body, I can't hang anymore, right? And that's a kick to the gut. But
Oh,
now it's teaching these guys and explaining sympathetic, parasympathetic to them. And I feel like the guys at Kansas, sometimes they'd call me mom or whatever. And these athletes that I work with now do that too. And it's always like, be careful, watch out, be safe. Everything we do, be safe.
well,
So
so that 5 years ago, when you felt like, okay, I can't hang like I had in the weight room, there needed to be a shift in your coaching approach then. And automatically, what kind of coaching did you take on, like in terms of philosophy or approach? Because that older way wasn't working. Yeah, I mean, it must have enhanced your ability to coach, if nothing
I,
else.
the last 3 years of my career have probably been the highest rate of development for me as an individual, coaching wise, and understanding probably what information can be shared, should be shared, shouldn't be shared. Um, but I think when that happened, it was probably, again, performance training and health training are two different things. Like, health is the basis of it, and we have to have health. But looking at gait and studying these athletes and their gait, you're like, man, you're going down a road. We want longevity in your career. So it's like probably more individualized when I went to Texas, where I only had 28 athletes. So the less athletes I've had, the more individualized I could get with them and understand their background, their history, who they are, what motivates them, what makes them tick. So getting, having a lot of athletes was good because I feel like I got good at coaching. But then having fewer athletes, I feel like I've gotten better at what makes them tick, what's their health history, more of a specific strength for them, each individual. Right.
Very,
Again, I didn't have that until 2019.
yeah, and okay, so 2019 rolls around and COVID is now emerging. How did that affect your coaching approach?
Well, so after COVID, I asked the guys to pull their phones out, and I said, what were your average steps in February of 20? I think it was 20. Was it 20 or 21 was COVID?
Yeah, 20,
February
20.
20. I said, how many average steps did you have? And their average was about 15,000 because they were going to and from class, walking to campus, doing everything. And then we had practice on top of that. But then when they came back, it was probably July or August when they came back. I said, pull out your phones. Let's see how many steps you had. 2,000.
Oh my gosh.
They went from 15,000 average per day to 2,000 average per day. And these guys, they were talking about these little twinges that they were feeling in torso or posturing. And I was like, okay, this is foundational work. This is fascial stuff, you know, because they haven't had the load on them. And I think there was a huge change then.
Oh, I can only imagine. Wow.
So I think
That's a
that
huge reduction.
yeah, huge. But um I think changing with the athlete and the athlete, what their demands are, we have to accept that athletes have changed and times have changed.
Wow. Okay, well, you're gearing up for the season, and we spoke of injuries. You know, they were unfortunately plagued by several injuries last season, but it seems like teams coming back pretty healthy, gearing up for November. I think is when your season starts to kick off, first week of November.
Yeah,
How?
our preseason starts October 3rd, I believe.
Okay,
Ish.
preseason, and then okay. So what's your strategy right now in this month of September? What are you? Oh yeah, what are the big buckets that you're looking at when preparing this team?
So I have to look at, I feel like with a lot of the research that I've looked through and personal experience and experience over 30 years of coaching is that once an athlete has a severe injury or surgery, that changes everything. Absolutely changes everything. So we kind of have two different thoughts on how we're training them. But a lot of the research has said, the biggest indicator of an injury is a previous injury. Okay, so we know these athletes are going through a lot. So what can we do to help these athletes who have been previously injured? And a lot of the balance stuff that I'm studying in research shows that sway velocity is different in a chronic gosh, I can't even think about it. It's CIA, chronic ankle instability athlete. Like sway velocity is different in an athlete who has chronic ankle instability versus someone who doesn't. So that has led to me looking at sway velocity with these athletes, and there's something there. I could speculate that a previously injured athlete needs to really, really manage their fatigue and try to decrease those little oscillations that occur over time that can add to the next injury.
Why do you think that is? Is it because mechanoreceptors, proprioceptors haven't been fired back up again? That there's still a pattern with it, or what
Yeah,
do you
well,
speculate?
also too, you think about cutting through tissue, right? There are nerves that are severed,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, some type of sensory feedback is missing, and motor output is that missing? Because I would tell you that we're like testing every joint in terms of strength, but these athletes still want to play. You're like, hey, here's a warning, but they still want to play. And yeah, some type of sensory feedback is missing, or the structure is damaged.
Wow. Okay. So, do you have a way of bulletproofing, or like what? Knowing this, now
My first,
you're yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, the first thing is limit fatigue.
Limit fatigue. How do you measure that?
Right now, what I would like to do is draw a line between sway velocity and fatigue when it occurs during the season. And I can speculate that when they're like high loads, athletes can tolerate high loads. Can they be built up to the high load and avoid monotony? Monotony is not a good thing. So doing the same thing every day, all day, and
Yeah.
you have to have variability in your program, not just in the weight room, but on the court.
Okay. So this may be rather controversial. I don't know, but it makes sense that we have the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands. That means anything we do, we're going to adapt to it specifically. And now the weight room is basically filled with movements for the competitive bodybuilder, power lifter, and Olympic lifter. They weren't derived for necessarily any other sports. So when we do these lifts, according to specific adaptation to impose demands, we are basically using the weight room to try to shove an athlete from a different sport into this place that was actually selected for bodybuilding, powerlifting, and Olympic lifting. And so I struggle with that every day. I struggle with how do we utilize these lifts to benefit these specific individuals and their pursuits in whatever field or sports or athletics possible. And it keeps me up at night, actually, sometimes. I'm just kind of reeling with it.
And we've talked about this, and I would tell you that there are brain or neuromuscular adaptations that are best suited for those lifts to help with fast twitch muscle fiber, right? So are you plugging into a 220 volt or a 110 volt?
Mm-hmm.
For performance, we need to plug into the 220 volt, right?
Sure.
You need to be able to access those high-end fast twitch muscle fibers, which are best developed by high load and tendon too. But maybe the 110 volt work has a place too in single leg work, functional work, so, but it depends on each athlete and how they're coming into us.
Okay, so if you had a pie chart between unilateral and bilateral lifts or movements, what's the percentage of each in your typical programs? Are you 50-50? Are you more like unilateral is going to be 75, bilateral 25? I mean, what's the breakdown, would you say?
I think it depends on the lift, but we would love to, and it doesn't mean that we always do, is have an exposure to a high load day per week and just maintain that. When we get, Dr. Kramer would argue that, you have to be able to handle the impact loads tissue-wise that occur 5 times or more your body weight when you land from a jump. You have to be able to control that. So yeah, there are places for high force output lifts. Catching a clean, I think, is important if you can catch it right, not shift to one side. So there are, again, I would like to probably 1 day a week we're using bilateral things or really stressing bilateral strength, total systemic strength stuff where we can access the 220 volt, right? But 3 days out of the week, it is functional, base work, stability stuff. So I would say maybe 25% that we're doing bilateral work.
Yeah, right on. That kind of lines up with what I was thinking. So
does it?
You're set up really nicely to individualize programming by having 15 elite athletes compared to 700 or how many others you worked with in Kansas and Texas and so on. But so with that must be a dream to be able to fine-tune programming for each person rather than just throwing here is the generic kind of basketball
but I will tell you
program.
That's changed over time based on the athletes that are coming in, because one, they've been previously injured or potentially, and two, the lack of foundation because they're early specialized. But I would tell you that when we've talked about it, Bill Parisi would call me at Kansas and be like, how are you training these guys? And we trained them hard, right? And the load was heavy there. But I would tell you, strength is important, right? And muscle mass is important because it is a contact sport.
Okay, so from one coach to the other here, I am constantly coming into this conundrum of when to load. Of course, we're looking at form and execution, like you say, the clean, you don't want them swaying off to one side and so on. Like there must be parameters, there must be metrics to some degree that fall in a certain gray shaded area of acceptability. Like, okay, how well are they performing it? Are they meeting a certain standard? compared to not meeting that standard, and I'm not going to have them do that lift. What kind of gray area do you utilize? What kind of measuring tools? How do you know when this athlete is ready to do these lifts? Is it just a visual kind of thing that you're using, or like, that's actually everything I'm seeing is lining up, let's keep on going? Do you utilize, you already mentioned the force plates, but how does it work for you? How do you personally, as a coach, go about it?
I would love to have dual force plates in the floor, right? And have them get their own internal feedback that they objectively see. I would love that. That would be number one. But right now it's based on, have they been previously injured? How does it look? And are they loading and catching it properly? And do they have a hip shift? Is one foot turned out and the other one's pointed forward? So it is assessing. And how do they feel? Because athletes today, they're going to tell you how they feel. And I want the feedback. I care about the feedback. Because if they're not comfortable doing something, they're not going to do it.
Oh, that's quite different. Instead of just, hiding whatever because they want to be out on the courts, the athletes in the past aren't really going to tell you what's going on necessarily.
Well, I'm asking. So it wasn't like that before. In terms of, ask them before, they'd be like, I'm good. But now it's like, now I get a dissertation from them on how they feel.
Another difference with Gen Z, I guess.
They know how they feel, so that's good.
Ah, okay. So your dissertation sounds fascinating, and in terms of monotony, fatigue, sway, all that. When do you think you're going to be done?
I have my dissertation proposal defense at the beginning of August. I have comps, or I'm sorry, at the beginning of October. I have comps at the end of October. Then it's dissertation writing all next year, and looking at the results of what we've collected, and then walking in May, and then hopefully conferring the degree in August. So less than a year.
And
that's the plan. But
all in your spare time, mind you.
Yeah, that's the point. It's like this is for me. It's not for anybody else. It's for me, and I'm going to take my time with it and make sure that it's done right.
Wow. That is fantastic. Okay. So if people want to, obviously they can go to the UConn website, but if people want to follow your trials and tribulations, your pursuits and so on, your career, LinkedIn, I'll put obviously the link to that in the description of the podcast, but where else can they go? Are you a social media mogul?
I used to be, but then I had interns that would do it for me. And now, I have more important things to do, but I am on Instagram. I check it every once in a while, but it's not good for me. Social media drives me crazy with the misinformation, or, comments. Just people are negative, and I don't like that. But I do work with Zach Zillner at Texas. We have a little program that we sell. So I get on Instagram, and it's A_HUDY.
Nice. Okay, what's the program? What are you selling?
A basketball program.
Nice. Conditioning program for basketball players?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, give me that and tell me how do we find out about
that? Let me see. This is how well I get on it.
This is where your MBA comes into play, obviously.
It's called Feel Good, Play Better. It's Zach calls it the Z training program, but we work together with trying to come up with a quality basketball program that generally fits everybody. But again, it's hard because you don't know what people's histories are. So it's good for coaches to interact with, because it gives them an idea of what we're trying to do, and it gives the athlete, a good program. But again, if you don't have eyes on you giving you feedback, it's tough.
Oh yeah. Well, I can't wait to see how this season plays out for you. I can't tell you how happy I am that you took the time out to have this conversation with me. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. I want to thank Andrea Hudy for coming on, as well as the UConn Women's Basketball Organization for allowing this to happen. Remember, if you need continuing education, check out my website, rockysnyder.com. We got online and in-person courses happening, especially that one November 3rd in Capitola, posture-based soft tissue mobilization. Check that out online. You'll get CEUs. And while you're online, again, go to SatantaCollege.com. Enter RS10 for 10% off tuition today. And you might want to check out my book, Return to Center, Strength Training to Realign the Body, Recover from Pain, and Achieve Optimal Performance. We'll see you on Instagram or here next week.